Recently, I did a video on the best zombie type monsters, so this video will be looking at the complete opposite of that. And at number 10, we have the Immortal Ruler. This card is one of the few zombie type monsters in the game who can't be special summoned, as for some reason it has that negative effect attached to him, and the only effect this card has on the field is that you can tribute this card to add the field spell card Zombie World from your graveyard to your hand. You can't even search the field spell card out from your deck. It simply allows you to recover it from the graveyard. An effect they thought was so good, they had to limit this card's special summon requirement. It does have decent stats though. A level 4 monster with 1800 attack is okay. Here's the thing about this card though. They released another card called Necroworld Banshee, who has the exact same stat line as Immortal Ruler, and has just a straight up better effect, as you can banish this card from the graveyard to activate a zombie world directly from your deck. And in fact, Necroworld Banshee is one of the best cards in the game that can search out a field spell card for its archetype, allowing you to just use it as a resource from the graveyard in order to do so, on a quick effect no less, as you can do it during your opponent's turn. So Immortal Ruler is really bad in comparison, but also not as bad as some of the other cards on this list. That's why it's only at number 10. And at number 9, we have Pain Painter. This is a level 2 zombie tuner monster who has an effect where its name is treated as Plague Spreader Zombie while face up on the field. And it even has the exact same stats, level, and attribute as Plague Spreader Zombie, except whereas Plague Spreader Zombie was a good card that was actually limited on the ban list for a few years, Pain Painter has no such things and basically saw no play. This card's other effects is the ability to change the level of 2 other zombie type monsters you control to level 2 until the end phase, and those monsters can't be used as synchro materials unless it's for a zombie type monster. Now, the real reason Pain Painter exists is because there are 3 level 6 synchro monsters who require Plague Spreader Zombie as one of their materials in order to bring them out. And since Plague Spreader Zombie was such a good tuner monster, with its ability to bring itself out from the graveyard, it was limited to 1 copy per deck. So it was actually hard to play these other synchro monsters. So as a compromise, they released Pain Painter later on in Yu-Gi-Oh's history. That way, there was another way for people to bring out these 3 specific synchro monsters without having to worry about not being able to use Plague Spreader Zombie. Especially since one of those synchro monsters, Archfiend Zombie Skull, required you to use 2 other materials in addition to Plague Spreader Zombie. So Pain Painter actually allowed you to bring that card out easier. The only problem though was those synchro monsters weren't particularly worth the amount of effort to bring them out, and never really saw very much play, even though Plague Spreader Zombie did see lots of play. So Pain Painter was kind of created to allow people to use the synchro monsters without having to worry about whether or not Plague Spreader Zombie would get banned. And then no one really used it anyway. And with Plague Spreader Zombie now an unlimited card, it definitely doesn't see any play today. And at number 8, we have Poison Mummy. This is a zombie type monster with a flip effect, where you can inflict 500 damage to your opponent when it's flipped face up. Now, 500 burn damage from a flip effect monster is not very good. It's kind of very mediocre, especially attached to a zombie monster, where zombies are all about being brought out from the graveyard face up, and not in face down defense position. That being said, some saving grace to this card would actually be pretty good at Duel Links, as in Duel Links, the starting life points is only 4,000. So cards which can effortlessly inflict 500 points of damage are highly valued in that game, especially since this card does have a decent defense stat at 1800. If this card was added to the early versions of Duel Links, I can guarantee you it would have seen some play in burn or stall decks. But this card currently hasn't been added to Duel Links yet, and I don't think it would make much of an impact if it was added today anyway. And at number 7, we have Fushioh Richie. This is a level 7 zombie monster that can only be special summoned from your hand or deck by the spellcaster named Great Dazard. And the Great Dazard is a level 6 monster with 1900 attack, who has the effect where, when it destroys a monster by battle, it will gain the effect to negate the effects of spell and trap cards that target this card. And if it destroys a second monster by battle, it will gain the effect to special summon Fushioh Richie from your hand or deck by tributing this card during your main phase. So you have to destroy 2 monsters by battle with this card before being able to tribute this card during your main phase too, in order to special summon Fushioh Richie from your hand or deck. And then Fushioh Richie has the effect where it can also negate the effects of spell and trap cards that target it. It can flip itself face down once per turn, and when this card is flipped face up, you get to special summon a zombie type monster from your graveyard. And with 2900 defense, that's not half bad. So, here's the problem with this card. It's way too hard to bring out. That's basically it. Its effect is not half bad, and neither are its stats, but requiring a level 6 spellcaster type monster with low attack, as 1900 is pretty low for a high level monster, to survive for 2 turns destroying monsters by battle is too convoluted for its summoning requirement. Sure, the card itself is able to special summon a zombie every turn, and that's great, but its protection isn't anything to write home about, and its stats are not super worth the amount of effort that goes into bringing it out. This is one of those cases where the card itself has decent effects, it's just overly convoluted in order to summon, which you'll see a few more times in this list as we continue. Although, fun fact about this card, its name is actually supposed to be Lich, the Undead King, as Fushioh is the Japanese phrase for Undying King, and Richie can be read as Lich in Japanese. And when they translated this guy into English, they just did a direct translation of his name from Japanese, without actually translating what it meant into English properly, which is funny because nowadays, they go out of their way to remove any Japanese sounding names from cards when they localize them into English. And once you realize this card is supposed to be a Lich, its effect actually makes a lot of sense with its requiring a spellcaster type monster to bring it out, as generally, in fantasy lore, Liches are created by spellcasters undergoing a ritual in order to turn themselves into an immortal undead being. And at number 6, we have Reborn Zombie. This is a level 4 zombie monster with 1000 attack, who has the effect that while you have no cards in your hand, this attack position monster cannot be destroyed by battle. When this card came out, there wasn't very many monsters that couldn't be destroyed by battle, and that was actually a pretty decent effect to have in a monster. And one of the more played monsters that couldn't be destroyed by battle was Spirit Reaper, so it made sense for another zombie to be released that couldn't be destroyed by battle either. But since Spirit Reaper had restrictions on it, where if it was targeted by a card effect it would destroy itself, I guess it only made sense for Reborn Zombie to also have restrictions on its indestructible status, in that it needed to be in attack position, and you needed to have no cards in your hand. Although this just made the card really clunky to play, as one of the best uses of a monster that can't be destroyed by battle is leaving them in defense position so that you don't take any life point damage, and so you can stall out in order to do other things. This card directly goes against both of those principles, as it needs to stay face up attack position with its low attack, and requires you to have no cards in your hand, so you can't really stall out for very long with this card anyway. It's like this card knows exactly why people would want to play a card that can't be destroyed by battle, in order to do the complete opposite of what you'd want. Although, fun little fact about this card is actually being revived in the artwork for Zombie Master, an actual good zombie card. And at number 5, we have Skelgon. This is a level 6 fusion monster with no effect that has 1700 attack and requires 2 mediocre normal monsters as its fusion materials. Now, what's bad about this card is that it's really weak for how difficult it is to bring out, and it's 1 level too high to be cheated out of the extra deck with instant fusion. There is another level 6 non-effect zombie fusion monster called Great Mammoth of Goldfine, who has 2200 attack and is much more reasonable than Skelgon. It's also not good, but it's not as bad as a 1700 attack level 6 non-effect fusion monster. There is almost no use for this card and no reason to try to waste resources bringing it out. But it's still not as bad as the top 4 cards on this list, because at least it can be cheated out of the extra deck with Fist of the Unrivaled Tenyi, or if it's brought out by a fusion summon method, it's at least a special summon on the field that can benefit from non-effect monster support. And this isn't very good, mind you, it's still a low attack, high level fusion monster that can't be brought out with instant fusion. And at number 4, we have Dokurorider. This is a level 6 non-effect ritual monster with low stats. This card is the lowest attack non-effect ritual monster in the game, with the second lowest being the Performance of the Sword, who has 50 more attack points than this card. Dokurorider was the first ritual monster released in Japan, and the first ever zombie ritual monster, and it wasn't very good and never saw any play, and gets a high spot on this list, higher than Skelgon, despite being a little bit stronger than that card, because ritual monsters are inherently a little bit more clunky to play than fusion monsters, and there's no real easy way to cheat this card out of your hand, like you can cheat Skelgon out of your extra deck. And at number 3, we have Vampire Genesis. This card was actually on the box art from one of the earliest structure decks in the game, one built around zombie monsters, and this card was not very good. This card can only be special summoned from your hand by banishing one very specific zombie type monster you control, called Vampire Lord, who himself is kind of difficult to bring out, being a level 5 monster. And for fulfilling this summoning requirement, you get a once per turn, discard a zombie type monster from your hand to target a different zombie type monster in your graveyard with a level less than the discarded zombie in order to special summon it. Now, back in the day when this card first came out, zombies weren't very good at reviving themselves from the graveyard yet. So this was kind of one of the earliest versions of it, before this card got absolutely power crept by things like Mizuki, Zombie Master, and Ilbud later on in the game's history. And the difference between all of these better zombies that can bring out zombies from the grave and this card is that those cards are much easier to bring out, or send to the graveyard in Mizuki's case, and have much easier effects to use, as this card has a really clunky mechanic of requiring you to specifically discard high-level zombies in order to special summon a low-level zombie, and most zombie decks play zombies of all around the same level, and the zombies that are low-level can usually special summon themselves. If it didn't have its bad summoning requirement of requiring you to banish a specific high-level zombie-type monster, who is also not very good on its own, I don't think its effect would have been half bad, but its effect is not good enough for its summoning condition, so it's kind of a useless card because of that. And at number 2, we have Return Zombie. This card has the effect where during your standby phase, you can pay 500 life points to add this card from your graveyard to your hand, if you have no cards in your hand. And here's the thing about the standby phase. That's directly after you just drew a card for your draw phase. So 99% of the time, you're going to have at least one card in your hand, which makes Return Zombie's effect almost comically bad, as you have to specifically design your deck around being able to use it. And it's not very good in decks which would normally be skipping their draw phase anyway, as there is a pretty decent card called Reckless Greed that allows you to draw 2 cards at the cost of skipping your next 2 draw phases. And if you just used that card and had no other cards in your hand, you could then add Return Zombie from your graveyard to your hand, in order to have a low attack level 4 zombie type monster. This card and Reborn Zombie might indicate that they had planned on some kind of handless zombie deck in the past, but since these 2 cards are the only real support that kind of archetype might have had, and they're both really bad, I can assume they abandoned whatever ideas they had for this type of thing. Although it's more likely these were probably just anime cards that were used in some gimmicky way in the anime, or they were just made as intentionally bad pack fillers that might have niche uses. And at number 1, we have Spirit of the Pharaoh. This card made the number 1 spot in my list of the worst boss monsters in the game, and it just so happens to be a zombie type monster as well. So it's fitting for it to take number 1 spot on this list too. Now, this card has the effect that when it's special summoned, you can special summon up to 4 level 2 or lower zombie type normal monsters from your graveyard. And hey, being able to special summon 4 monsters from your graveyard is pretty good. The problem with this card though is how it's special summoned. In order to special summon this card, you have to use the effect of the first sarcophagus, which functions very similarly to Destiny Board, in that you activate a trap card which will stay face up on the field, and then for the next 2 turns, it will place cards from your deck on the field. The second sarcophagus, and then the third sarcophagus, each one during your opponent's end phase. And then after 2 turns have passed, and you have all 3 sarcophagus cards face up on your side of the field, you can send them all to the graveyard in order to special summon the Spirit of the Pharaoh from your hand or deck. But here's the problem with this summoning method. If any of the sarcophagus cards are destroyed while they're face up on the field, all the other ones automatically get destroyed as well, completely ruining the summoning requirements. So you have to protect your spell and trap card zone for 2 turns while also playing all of these dead cards in your deck, and trying to fill up your graveyard with level 2 or lower normal zombie type monsters, as for some reason, it only works on normal monsters, and only really weak low level ones at that. And for that incredibly convoluted summoning requirement, You get a card that's not really worth it, it only has 2500 attack, and it swarms the field with useless monsters that are pretty difficult to get into the graveyard anyway. It just requires so much setup in order for it to be used to its full effect, and then once you have everything set up, successfully bring out the Spirit of the Pharaoh after 2 turns of protecting your back row, all you get is a mediocre monster who brings out 4 normal monsters from your graveyard. There is a card called Tri-White that can bring out 3 level 2 or lower normal monsters from your graveyard without any other setup. So Spirit of the Pharaoh has kind of been power crept by the spell card Tri-White, and it was never very good when it came out anyway. Alright, and that's the end of the video. If you know of any other worse zombie monsters that should have made this list, or have ideas for future videos just like this one, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments. The more specific the topic of the worst stuff video, the better. And also, don't forget to subscribe for weekly videos just like this one.